Okay, I just have a few announcements to make before the program begins. My name is Cheryl Pemberton. I'm with the Mid-Continent Public Library. Thank you for joining us tonight. I do ask if you could keep your mic muted throughout the program. If you have questions of our presenter, please put them in the chat, and at the end of the program, I will relay them to him to answer. I also will include a link to a survey both at the beginning of the program and at the end of the program. And we do appreciate your feedback. If you could take a few minutes to fill out the survey.
All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. My name's Lily. I'm so glad you could join us here tonight for our South Park program. It's the case that came before Brown versus Board. So before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. So we can all enjoy the program tonight. I'm going to ask that you take this time now to turn your cell phones on silent. And if you need to use restrooms, you can come out the store here and just walk straight back. There's a little enclave there and there. Should we need to exit for any sort of emergency, we'll just come out these doors and right out those front doors that you came into the library through. Over here on this table on that back wall, we have some books for checkout as well as some feedback sheets, so you can tell us what you think about the program. And then if you find that this program is up your alley, we do have some upcoming events that you might like. On February 15th at 7 p.m. on Zoom, we're going to host Brown versus Board of Education and the Civil Rights Movement. And then on February 20th on 7 p.m. again on Zoom, we're going to have Motown, the music that moved the world. If you're interested in attending more of our programs, feel free to follow us on Instagram at #MCPLprograms. We'll post all about our programs, both in person and Zoom on there. But without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our presenter, Andrew, here. Thank you.
Thanks. Let's see, I need to share my screen, right? Right. Good. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Everybody's good to go. Well, thanks so much. My name is Andrew Gustafson. I'm the curator of interpretation at the Johnson County Museum, which is a fancy way of saying I love history, and my work is helping other people access their history, their community's history, their own history. I get to do that in several ways at the Johnson County Museum. The main bulk of my work is in exhibitions, doing the research and the writing for exhibitions that we create, and then leading the team through that creation and installation process. But I also do things like blog posts and social media posts and programming like this out in the community. I'd like to encourage you to go to the Johnson County Museum. If you haven't been there before, we're down in Overland Park on 87th Street and Metcalf, on Metcalf at 87th Street. So today I'm going to be talking about an episode in Johnson County history that I've come to realize is not really very widely known. It's pretty important history, though, vitally important history. It's about social justice and civil rights. It's a story of a community coming together to overcome a major obstacle to success, namely racism and segregation. And it's relevant history with the recent protest movements across the nation and continued discussions of our rights as residents and citizens, who has voice in community, and what the future should look like for our communities. I want to acknowledge that the story is a pretty complex one, and I'm going to be talking about this in a pretty simplified version, right? An overview of the events. I know that there are folks who are still living in the South Park area whose parents and grandparents were historical actors. I'm working with the sources that I have available to me in order to tell this story. And I also want to note that some of the original documents contain language that some may find offensive today, and I won't be reading those words as we go through. So a little bit of background for this presentation. The main events took place in 1948 and 1949, so 75 years ago this year. To set the stage, Johnson County was in a period of prosperity after World War II. Suburbanization is starting to begin, so people are moving out of Kansas City downtown and moving into the suburbs in Johnson County. Prairie Village, the largest suburban development at the time, was just starting to be constructed in 1946. And between 1940 and 1950, Johnson County's population would grow from 33,000 to 62,000 residents, so almost doubling. And by 1960, would more than double to 143,000. So this is a period of immense growth and change in the landscape of the county. So we're talking about a county that's leaving behind its rural and agricultural past and starting to become more suburban and more recognizable to us today. So then, would it surprise you if I said, let's see, that Johnson County had a desegregation case that predated Brown v. Board of Education, and that an entire school walked out in support of equal access to education, and that the county's first NAACP chapter was formed in response to the situation, and that the Shawnee Mission North High School, one of the largest high schools in the county today, was integrated in 1949 as a result of this historical episode. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So the events that we're talking about took place in South Park, which is a community just north of Merriam, Kansas, just below the county line with Wyandotte County. If you're familiar with the area, being just south of the county, that might be how it got its name. We're not really sure why it's called South Park, actually. But it's bounded by 48th and 50th Streets between Antioch and Knox, so not a very large area. But it was developed in the 1880s as a garden suburb, so a place to escape downtown and move out to an area that was outside of the downtown area with trees and gardens and things. As best as we can tell, it was an integrated community from the start, with Black and white families living next to each other, their children attending the same schools, and the adults working together in the community. It was described in the early 1900s as a farming community, being so close to Johnson County's agriculture, and massive suburbanization didn't reach this area until the 1950s or even later. It was on the Hawker Line, which was an interurban streetcar line that ran from downtown Kansas City out to Olathe, out past Shawnee. So you'd be able to hop on that line in either direction and use that as transportation. There were several hundred homes there. There's a school building and a few churches. And that school was integrated until sometime between the 1890s and 1912, when a new school was built for white students specifically, relegating the Black students in South Park to an older one-room schoolhouse. The school was called the Walker School. You can see it on the screen there. It was originally called School Number 90. It was out of 101 one-room schoolhouses that used to be in Johnson County, dotting the landscape. It's built in the 1880s. Eventually, they added on a second classroom there, and they also added on a basement lunchroom. You can see through the white door that's open in the bottom left. When the school was segregated, it became known as Madam C.J. Walker School, named for the famous Black female entrepreneur and philanthropist. We don't know the connection there, why it was named after her. But it served between 40 and 50 students in those just two classrooms, with at most 2 teachers teaching those 8 grades there. And it lacked the most basic amenities. There was no indoor plumbing or toilets, no electricity, and no central heating. Students received hand-me-down books and educational supplies that were deemed outdated or unusable at the white school in South Park. And the Walker School, though, did not lack for dilapidation. There were holes in the roof, so the weather would come in regardless of what that was, and the basement lunchroom that you can see there flooded when it rained. So many of the one-room schoolhouses lacked for some of these amenities in Johnson County in this era, but the Walker School was an unequal facility, even in comparison to its white counterpart in South Park, that school that was built in 1912. Jim Crow is the label we give to segregation and to the lack of civil rights that African Americans experienced between the end of the Civil War in the 1860s and the beginning of the Civil Rights era in the 1960s. And Jim Crow typically mandated separate but equal for nearly everything in society. So we're talking about separate drinking fountains, very famously, separate entrances to buildings, separate sections of a bus, and also separate school buildings. Separate but equal was a pretty hollow slogan, though, as you can see on the screen. Conditions were rarely equal for anything for the Black equivalent of what we might be talking about. And to make matters worse, in 1947, the school board in South Park built a brand new modern school. And you'll see that on the screen now. This school was built using $90,000 of taxpayer bonds that were paid by the residents of the community. So both Black and white families were paying the taxes for that new school. However, the school board declared that this building would only be for the district's 222 white students. The 40 or so Black students would continue to attend the Walker School. And that was just on the screen before this. This new building, as you can see, was state-of-the-art. And it was fireproof, it had indoor plumbing and heating, which we would just assume a school would have, right? Multiple classrooms and an auditorium space. The educational standards and textbooks and the availability of supplies were higher at the South Park School than at most county schools at the time, according to reports from the era. So Black parents in South Park were understandably upset about the conditions that their students were forced to endure at the Walker School. And they pressed the school board for repairs and higher educational standards for their children at the school. The school board promised that it would authorize work on the Walker School just as soon as the debt from this new school was retired in 30 years. As a quote unquote quick fix, the board installed a new mailbox on the building and a stop sign out front of the Walker School. So essentially doing nothing to improve the conditions that the parents were addressing the school board about. At this point, I want to introduce some of the historical actors in our story, in our history. The Webb family, whose children attended the school, decided to do something about it. Kansas in general, and specifically South Park, had attracted many exodusters. These are formerly enslaved African Americans who migrated out of the South after the Civil War and moved to cities like New York City and Chicago and Pittsburgh, and also places like Kansas City. So Alfonso Webb's parents had moved from North Carolina just around the turn of the century. And by the 1940s, the community of South Park boasted more than 40 Black families who have exoduster roots. The Webbs, Alfonso and his wife, you can see in the middle there, Alfonso is seated and his wife is standing just to the right of him. She was from Quindaro, Kansas, in Kansas City, Kansas, started a home in South Park in 1937. Mary cleaned and took in laundry for white families in the area, and Alfonso worked odd jobs and agricultural work until he started his own concrete business a little bit later on. Both were very active in the South Park Community Club, and the whole family attended the Mount Olive Baptist Church. Their 10 children, 5 boys and 5 girls, attended the Walker School. Now, the Webbs were pretty instrumental in pushing the school board to address the inequities of the Walker School and began gathering support in the South Park community from other Black parents and families living there to challenge the school board. Another important historical actor here is Esther Brown. As the Webbs and the area's Black families continued to push the school board to do something, and they refused over and over, other people in the community got involved in the fight as well. So South Park resident Esther Brown, a white Jewish woman, heard about the struggle from her domestic worker, Helen Swan, whose own children attended the South Park school, the Walker School. Brown immediately threw her aid behind the struggle. And she said, "It's simply the right thing to do." That's a quote from her. Her repeated attempts, though, to push the school board to action yielded very little, other than racist jeers and veiled threats from both the school board itself, as well as the other white people attending the school board meetings. There's a quote here in another article I wanted to read. She stood up in one of the school board meetings and said, "Look, I'm just a Kansas housewife. I don't represent these people, but I've seen the conditions of their school. I know none of you would want your children educated under such circumstances, and they're not asking for integration, just a fair shake." Despite this, Brown continued to receive threatening phone calls at all hours of the day. She was called a communist. She was called terrible racial epithets. And one morning, Brown and her husband found the charred remains of a cross that had been burned in their front lawn in the night. Alfonso and Mary Webb, for their part, experienced pretty similar harassment with the phone calls and name calling, and also had their back porch set on fire in the middle of the night one night. So to attempt to put an end to the issue, the school board passed a zoning regulation that gerrymandered the community so that there were 2 school districts now within South Park, meaning that the white students and the Black students would attend different schools within these 2 districts, even though in some cases students would have to walk past one school to get to the other. So it's not really a fix, right? And so the Webbs, with the support of other families in South Park, took matters into their own hands. In May of 1948, Alfonso Webb filed a lawsuit directly with the Kansas Supreme Court in the name of his sons, Harvey and Alfonso Webb Jr., second and first grade students at the Walker School. The lawsuit demanded that Black students be admitted to the new South Park school. The lawsuit bypassed the issue of separate but equal and instead pointed out that segregation of their school in a town the size of South Park or Merriam was illegal according to Kansas state statute. And I'll get back to that in just a second. When Black students were again denied entry to the new school in the fall of 1949, 39 of the 41 students and both their teachers refused to attend Walker School that year. And you can see they walked out on the screen here. Their boycott was called Walker's Walkout, and it lasted the entire school year. Teachers Corinthia Nutter on the back left and Hazel McCrae Weddington on the back right agreed to continue to teach the students in living rooms and church basements throughout the year. Their pay came from bake sales and fish fry proceeds. Esther Brown wrote letters to gather support and also donations from people around the country to help with their pay. and she also reached out to the NAACP national chapter for donations. As Mary Webb later said in an oral history with the museum, the Johnson County Museum, she said, "We just wanted something better for our children." And so did the teacher, Corinthia Nutter. We have a little bit of information here about her as well. She was born in Dallas, Texas in 1907 and moved to the Kansas City area in 1920 around the age of 13. Several years later, she attended Western University, a very prestigious all-Black university in Quindaro, Wyandotte County, Kansas. And she worked as a hairdresser to pay for her education while she was there, likely in a Madam C.J. Walker hairstyling program, which was very prominent in both Kansas cities in the Black community. In the late 1930s, she earned that teaching certificate, and she set out to start her career in education. In 1938, she secured her first position teaching at a school called the Dunbar School in Shawnee, Kansas, and it was a segregated school. She was the only teacher there, and she taught all 8 grade levels in that school. A few years later, in 1943, Nutter became one of 2 educators at the Walker School in South Park, and she stayed on after the walkout and agreed to teach in such unusual circumstances. Speaks volume about how much she valued education for all students. Her fellow instructor, Hazel McCrae Weddington, taught grades 1 through 4, and Mrs. Nutter taught grades 5 through 8, both out of living rooms of residents in the community. Now, importantly, at about the same time, from the South Park Community Club that existed, Black families in South Park organized Johnson County's first National Association for the Advancement of Colored People chapter, the NAACP. You can see on the screen there. It formed in January of 1948, ahead of the lawsuit and the walkout, but was really instrumental because it connected the struggle happening in South Park, Kansas, to the national chapter of the NAACP, and provided needed support, both financial and also legal, to the lawsuit that came out of this situation. In fact, the South Park story was told in the NAACP's publication called The Crisis in May and December of 1949. So it did reach a national audience in these 2 very prominent stories. They raised the profile of what was going on here to that national level. And so donations came in from around the country to help pay for those teacher salaries and also towards the legal fund for the Webb versus School District Number 90 lawsuit. The national chapter also provided lawyers for that lawsuit. Among the lawyers was a future U.S. Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall. And Marshall maintained that, quote, a complete equality of educational opportunities cannot be obtained in a dual system of education, end quote. An assistant counsel to Marshall during this case had written that border states such as Kansas, which do not have the type of segregation laws that exist in so-called southern states, present an excellent opportunity to break down the segregation which has been arbitrarily practiced by local school boards. So all this to say, the NAACP was very strategic in their approach and the selection of the South Park case as a candidate for their support. In this photo from 1948, you can also see Alphonso Webb there, clearly labeled in the back, as well as Esther Brown labeled in the front. They were instrumental in founding this chapter in Merriam, and Alphonso Webb would go on to become the first chapter president. Interestingly, after the situation we're talking about tonight, this chapter closed because there were no longer dues-paying members. They achieved the particular end they set out to achieve. The current chapter of the NAACP in Johnson County was founded in the 1970s as a separate chapter. So the lawsuit, there's a large file of information about the lawsuit at the Kansas State Historical Society, and I'll just touch on it briefly because it's the result of this that I want to talk about most. But the lawsuit was heard by the Kansas Supreme Court in April of 1949. Corinthia Nutter provided key testimony during the trial, speaking perhaps better than anybody else about the condition that she was forced to endure as teacher and that her students were expected to learn in. You can see a great quote there from her: "Schools shouldn't be for a color, they should be for children," right? A pretty simple message. The NAACP lawyers made clear that Walker School was in no way an equal facility to the South Park School, the new school, in a clear violation of the philosophy of separate but equal. Beyond that, the lawyers argued that the South Park School Board had violated that 1879 statute in Kansas. This statute called for, allowed for cities of 15,000 or more people, called first-class cities, to maintain segregated educational facilities. But cities that were less than 15,000 people were not allowed to maintain separate facilities divided on race. So Merriam, which was a very small third-class city at the time, their school board segregation was in fact in violation of that state statute at the time. Seems like a pretty arbitrary requirement for how you divide up your schools, but it was this Kansas state statute, and so that would be the law that they should be operating under. And so the Kansas Supreme Court decision came in June of 1949. They found that the actions of the South Park School Board were, quote, arbitrary and unreasonable, an attempt by subterfuge or deception to bring about segregation, which the laws of the state do not permit. And you can also see another quote on the screen from the Kansas Supreme Court. The defendants, the South Park School District, have for generations violated the laws of Kansas by segregating the white pupils from the black pupils. There are very few matters of public policy any better established in the state than that grade school districts cannot do this. So despite South Park and Merriam both having under the 15,000 residents, the school board for South Park had maintained that segregated facility and then explicitly created two districts based on race for students to attend those schools. So the court said that those two schools could exist within a school district, but the educational facilities, quote, of the two schools maintained in the district must be on comparable basis at all times, and the districts for them must be made without any regard to the race or color of the pupils. This is the Kansas Supreme Court speaking. So if this was not possible in order to build two identical facilities for South Park, which financially it probably wasn't for a community of the size at the time, then the, quote, black pupils and all pupils in District 90 must be permitted to attend the South Park District School beginning in the school year of 1949 to 1950. So to be clear, the court was ordering that the schools be equal in every way and not based on the race of the students who attended the school. It's interesting because that didn't uphold separate but equal, of course, but the court ordered the school should be integrated if the second school couldn't be made comparable. And that likely surprised everybody involved in the case, including the black families that started the case. It would be another 5 years until another case in Kansas, Brown v. Board, right, overcame the idea of separate but equal education in a national way. Of course, that court case would lead to the integration of schools across the nation. But like that court case from the U.S. Supreme Court, it took time to implement that change, and not everybody was thrilled to integrate school facilities. And this was also true in South Park. The school board didn't immediately give in to the Kansas Supreme Court's requirements. In fact, following the announcement of the decision of integration of the school, the board sought to try to keep the facility segregated, quote, voluntarily. According to the NAACP's magazine Crisis in December 1949, the petitions were circulated by white residents in South Park and a few black favor seekers, in quotes, resulting in 51% of the black community signing on to this petition that the school remain open and segregated voluntarily. How could that possibly be after this court case was just won? Well, the signees had been told that they were signing a petition that the school should be used as a pre-kindergarten and a recreation hall for the community. So they've been lied to. A secret school board meeting commenced. They used that petition that the community had signed. The favor seekers were there speaking on behalf of the black community. And they stated that the black community had no desire for their children to attend any school other than the Walker School. Painters and carpenters were hired by the district to begin freshening it up. They were white volunteers, notably. And the school board filed a motion with the Supreme Court to allow the Walker School to remain open voluntarily and be segregated voluntarily. But the black parents realized what was happening. They signed and submitted a separate petition to the Kansas Supreme Court to the effect that under no circumstances would they allow their children to be sent to any school other than the new South Park School. At a separate meeting, the school board claimed that they'd received permission from the Supreme Court of Kansas to build a $60,000 school for the black students, but they'd be spending $5,000 a year for the next 12 years in order to build that school. The assembled parents once again made it very clear that their students would not be attending any school other than the new South Park School. And that seems to be the end of attempts to continue a segregated school in South Park. So let's talk about some legacies from this. On September 9th, 1949, black students attended the new South Park Elementary School, not the one pictured here, for the first time. Interestingly, when the fall term started in 1949, the school you see there, the Walker School, the South Park School Board hired 3 new teachers to staff that school. And according to the NAACP publication, they waited patiently for 2.5 days in vain for any child to enroll. Not one student came to the Walker School. The Walker School was subsequently closed and became home to a lumber company in the 1950s. It was a short-lived community center in the 1960s, and in 1963 became home to the Philadelphia Baptist Church, which I believe it still is today and is in the picture there on the screen. In 1947, South Park School, the 1947 South Park School, the one that was integrated, was eventually replaced with a larger school, and the older building became a church as well. South Park was annexed to Merriam in 1957 and became part of the Merriam community. The Webb lawsuit that we were talking about tonight was the 11th school segregation case to reach the Kansas Supreme Court at the time. It held that segregated schools in small towns were unconstitutional and that separate school facilities must be equal in all ways and not created based on race. The next step was a challenge to separate but equal philosophy altogether, which of course happens in 1954, 5 years later with Brown v. Board. There, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that despite equal facilities and other quote unquote tangible factors, separate could never be equal. For Black students, according to the Supreme Court's decision, segregated facilities, quote, generate a feeling of inferiority as to the status and may affect their hearts and minds in ways unlikely to ever be undone, end quote. Ultimately, the court declared that segregated schools deprive Black students of equal protection under the law, which is guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, one that was passed in the 1860s after the Civil War. And all students in the U.S., all schools in the U.S. were ordered to be integrated with all deliberate speed, which meant different things in different communities, unfortunately. Famously, Thurgood Marshall, the lawyer for the South Park case, was a leading legal strategist for the Brown v. Board case out of Topeka 5 years later. And at a party thrown to celebrate the Brown v. Board decision, Esther Brown said, quote, little people like us bring about such big things. The most brilliant lawyers couldn't have succeeded but for the help of people like you here tonight, end quote. Other legacies, other changes that happened in the community. In Johnson County, in fall 1949, 5 to 7 Black high school students, the reports vary based on the newspaper account you're reading, attended Shawnee Mission Rural High School, which is Shawnee Mission North today, for the very first time. The northern part of Johnson County had never provided high school education for Black students, and those who wanted to continue education past the 8th grade had to be privately sent to schools in Wyandotte County. The Olathe High School did periodically permit Black students, but living in the northern portion of the county, you would have had to have paid out of district tuition to attend Olathe schools and also found your way there, which wouldn't be nearly as easy in the 1940s as it might be today. Importantly, the South Park case led to another change. On the left side of the screen, you could see the McCallop family of Shawnee. They'd been instrumental in in making sure that Black students reached schools in Kansas City, Kansas for high school and also for college. Robert McCallop Sr. turned his agricultural flatbed truck into a makeshift school bus and bused his children and his neighbors' children up to Kansas City, Kansas. And later, as more students did that, he purchased several buses and created a private bus line to drive them there on a daily basis. With the integration of the Shawnee Mission School District, though, McCallop became a bus driver for SMSD and ultimately retired there in the 1980s. Despite the legal victory in South Park, the path forward was not necessarily an easy one. Decades of segregation had left their mark on both the white and Black students, and they were apprehensive about integration. While newspapers proudly reported that Black students attended the Johnson County schools without incident, in quotes, some students did in fact encounter overt racism once the school was integrated. Mary Wynn Rowland recalled, quote, going to South Park School was very traumatic for me. The color of my skin never mattered until I went to South Park. The children would turn away from me. They called me maid and said on the playground I could not swing, but I had to push them, end quote. For the Webb family, access to better educational facilities really shaped their family. Their children graduated from high school in Johnson County. Several attended college and took professional jobs. Mary and Alfonso, shown here in the 1990s with their granddaughter named Robin Williams, she was a star athlete and an exceptional student with college scholarships available to her across the country. 6 of Mary and Alfonso's 10 children are still living, and they're in the metro today. 3 of them still live in South Park community. The new Johnson County Library being built in Merriam will honor the family with the Alfonso and Mary Webb Reading Room when it opens, I believe, next year. Esther Brown died of cancer in 1970 after helping with the Brown v. Board case in Topeka and continuing to lobby for equal access to education for African Americans and women throughout the Kansas City area. And Corinthian Nutter. Following the integration of the South Park School, Corinthian Nutter was left without a teaching job. She was not invited back to the new South Park School. Despite her activism, or perhaps because of it, Nutter next taught at Olathe's all-Black Lincoln School, where she also served as principal. She taught later at Olathe's Westview Elementary, where she was the only Black teacher among a school population that remained all white until 1970. 2 years later, she retired as principal of that school. The picture on the left was taken her last year as a teacher and principal of that school. She often spoke to reporters throughout her life about her experiences in this historical episode and gave programs on the South Park case and how important it was. but she announced her retirement from speeches in 1999. After her retirement, Nutter remained active in her community and in her church. She was honored by the NAACP and the American Association of University Women. She received the YWCA of Greater Kansas City's first Racial Justice Award and was inducted into the Mid-America Education Hall of Fame for her role in civil rights movement and her dedication to education for all children. Picture on the right was taken in 2003, a year before she passed away at the age of 98. So I'll end with a few thoughts tonight. The activity in South Park really was an important part of the buildup in legal cases, in attitude, in actions, in personal convictions, leading to the integration of schools nationally. While it was not a contributing case legally to Brown v. Board, it certainly played an important role in serving as one of the capstones on a foundation of legal decisions supporting the integration that Brown v. Board would bring. As the NAAC publication noted in December of 1949, quote, "This story deserves to be told. Neither bloodshed nor rioting has resulted from the integration of the Blacks and white children. The only noticeable result is that one school is bigger and better than has ever been before, and the children of both races are being benefited thereby and from their daily living in a democratic school community," end quote. It's important to remember that the South Park school episode included overtly racist words, actions, and attitudes. There was name calling, there were threats, there was a burned cross and a porch set on fire. On the other hand, as the NAACP noted, when integration actually occurred, it happened without a major incident, which perhaps is a low bar to judge by, but not one that every community in the U.S. would reach. Those in Johnson County who opposed integration did not disappear from South Park or the landscape. They did lose their fight for segregation. There were many episodes in history that have brought Johnson County to closer to an equal, more just society, and the South Park school case is one of the most notable episodes. As Dolores Gaines, a friend of Corinthian Nutter's, recalled about the events in 1949, the important thing was that children were educated, minds were changed, and hearts were changed. If you'd like to learn more, I want to point out that there are two great resources out there. An article called A Pioneer in Civil Rights. This came out in 1995 by Milton Katz and Susan Tucker in the Kansas History Journal, a publication in Kansas. And also a book by Rachel Devlin called A Girl Stands at the Door in 2018. This is about a larger story about women in school desegregation cases, but the South Park case features pretty prominently. So thanks very much for listening to this presentation. I'm happy to take questions. I'm going to put my contact information up on the screen. I'm always happy to take questions by email as well. Thank you. While we wait for questions to come in through the chat, for those who might be joining us by Zoom, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide and make an appeal to come visit the Johnson County Museum. Johnson County Museum is located in Overland Park, Kansas, on Metcalf at 87th Street in the old King Louis bowling alley. If you're familiar with that area, you can see we have exhibitions that cover the long history of the county from before its founding in the 1850s all the way up through the modern era. In the upper right of the screen, you can see that beautiful 1955 Chevy Bel Air. It's sitting in front of the all-electric house, a full-size ranch-style house that 5 families lived in Johnson County before it came to the museum. We also have a kids' play area called Kidscape, which is based on the history that you see out in the museum. A really fun place, fully immersive play area. And we maintain research records for researchers and a one-room schoolhouse called the Lanesfield Schoolhouse out by Edgerton, Kansas. So come see us sometime. It's a pretty fun place. Right now we have an exhibition up about a time capsule from 1951 that was discovered in the county courthouse. Okay, questions from anyone online or from the audience here?
Okay, do we have any questions from those in the Zoom meeting? I don't think we have any questions tonight, Andrew.
Okay.
Ah.
The question is the Walker School building still standing? And it is. I believe it's still the church building. And actually, I'm proud to report, pleased to report that it was just added to the Kansas Register of Historic Places last weekend. The nomination went through. So that's pretty exciting. And I think there's some exploration of whether it can be added to the National Register. So a great way to memorialize that school building, which I think is still now that church facility, the Philadelphia Baptist Church.
I did have one nice comment. Incredible that this story isn't more prominently known, particularly in our area. No questions, but this was a wonderful presentation.
Well, thank you so much. And I agree with you. This is such an important episode in history for the entire region. And certainly knowing that Brown v. Board comes out of Kansas, this being a predecessor case, makes it a really important one. So thanks so much for attending tonight. And I know there's some other great programming coming up here at Mid-Continent Public Library. So I hope you tune back in the future and come see us at the Johnson County Museum.
Good night, everyone.